Hello, everyone, dear Paradigma listeners. We are here with a new podcast, and here I don't only have a special guest, a special colleague and friend, but today we are doing an English episode, newly launched book, which makes it even more special also for me. But I'm sure the topic wise and the book wise, the listeners will be so interested in the subject. But first and foremost, I would like to introduce my guest, Dr. Christina Velentza. Christina, welcome.
Thank you so much, Erman. It's nice to be here with you.
Thank you so much for sparing the time in your busy schedule. And we have been meaning to do this podcast for a while. And finally, I'm really happy to do it. We will be talking about Christina's new book, basically. And more or less, we'll be going over the initial idea and how, the topic unfolded or the writing process. Christina is a policy advisor, refugee law and human rights, and attorney at law. So she's highly both on the field and theory-wise, an excellent emerging young scholar, which I'm really delighted to have her. We shoot, I think we shot a previous episode for Academicus for a different channel we had with a couple of colleagues. Now this is for a special occasion for the podcast, and on her new book titled "The Interpretation of the 1959 Convention Relating to the Status of Refugees by Greece and Turkey after the Syrian refugee crisis." So, without further ado, maybe Christina, maybe we can start with setting the stage for the book. Like, where did the inspiration for this great extensive research come from? Because I also been following your work, like you're working on the ground in refugee law during the peak of the Syrian influx, the refugee. What did you observe as the that made you realize that there was a gap in the literature to focus on this particular topic?
Thank you so much, Erman, for that and for that so nice introduction and your very kind words. I really appreciate that. So basically, this work started somehow 10 years ago, 10 to 12 years ago. So it was a time that I was working with the Ministry of Interior and the Asylum Service in Greece. So it was newly established at the time. It was at this period, as you very well mentioned, of the Syrian influx, Syrian crisis. So we had many people from Syrians coming and requesting for asylum, for international protection. So back at the time, I thought it's very interesting in parallel with my work and also working with UNHCR at the same time with the ministry. We were somehow supporting, the ministry. So I was working in parallel with my research. So it was the time that I decided that I think that it would be interesting to have this internal information, and somehow encrypt it or track the data, let's say, collect the data from the field, and also starting some type of academic research, although I want to be a little bit more specific that this book is not, as you may well have understood, it's not a strictly, firmly legal book, right, or political book. It has also social component, anthropological component. So one of the reasons how it started, it was my prior experience with the policy making here in Greece. But at the same time, after that, I switched to the UK. So through my fellowship back at the time with Chatham House, I was asked to invest a little bit more to what we call the Greek response to the crisis back at the time. So how the institutions, how the government, how the whole system responded. Did they respond well or not to what happened, to the movements of, so it was very high movement of people for Greek terms, okay? And then when I started doing that and I found my supervisor, my dear Mr. Yannis Ktistakis, who used to be my supervisor, and now he is the judge at the Strasbourg court. So he kind of suggested, why don't you try to kind of invest or compare with Türkiye, how they do it in Turkey, because the movements were coming from Turkey to Greece. So that was another reason for why I mean, that's the why, the second why this book. And then the third why, after like digging into the literature and starting my thesis back at the time, I had to come to Turkey for 5 years. I stayed. I collected lots of data. Back at the time, I met lots of people who worked with Syrians, you know, different organizations. But for me, in my personal view, and what I found in the literature is that when we have this kind of comparison, refugee populations in Greece and Turkey, there is somehow a gap between after the 60s, 50s, 60s, you know, and then we had the exchange of populations, then 50s, 60s, and then there's somehow a gap in the modern history, let's say, of the two countries. So so that's how I decided to kind of focus on what happens now. Of course, I didn't cover this whole gap after the 70s, 80s, I would say, but what I try to do is at least cover somehow the period after 2010, 11 up to 2022 with some type of changes and modifications of the law that it has been incorporated in this book.
Excellent introduction, I suppose, because I think that sets the stage for the other questions we may have regarding the details of the book. Thank you so much for that. I think we can also focus on maybe a bit on the details and in terms of the legal framework and the differences in implementation of that legal framework over the case, because I think, as you outlined, Christine, so the major focus of your book is the differences in the legal frameworks between the two countries. So, like, how did Turkey's geographical limitation, quote unquote, to the 1951 convention force it to create a temporary protection regime for the Syrian migrants and refugees? Like, how did it also compare and contrast with the Greece's framework as an EU member state versus a non-EU member state per se?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Arman, for the question. I think that's one of the very interesting points of the book, because I somehow try to, again, I don't like to use the word compare, but I just try to, let's say, explain the legal framework of Greece, which is an EU country, fully EU country, signatory to everything, and we have to comply with the EU norms. We are fully abided by the Geneva Convention, the 1951, for the protection of refugees. This is the main instrument for those probably who are not very familiar with the term. And Turkey also is abided by the law, by the convention, but it has what we say the geographic limitation. So that means that Turkey is not a fully member to the convention. Very, very simplistically speaking, very simply, it means that Turkey doesn't recognize any or every asylum seeker as a multiji, as a refugee. So, according to the convention, to the treaty, someone has to come from the European territory to Turkey and then request asylum and then being processed and then, if recognized, as a refugee. So that's what the law says. But I think and this leads to the temporary protection, let's say, for people who seek asylum in Turkey. I think one good positive thing out of all this throughout these years for Turkey, I would say, is that Turkey made lots of efforts and harmonized the law. So they did this famous harmonization, you know, of the law with the EU norms, which is a very positive thing for the beneficiaries, for the people who want to be protected on the ground. So now, because it's a very legal question, I would say that legally speaking, the problem with the countries that still have this geographic limitation is that they cannot fully provide permanent legal status for asylum seekers. Although now, you know, there are many counter arguments, like Turkey has received lots of funding from the EU and has provided many rights to people, like education, you know, access to health, the children are going to school, you know, these are the facts, and we need to mention, and these are positive developments in the asylum sphere of when it has to do with Turkey. But legally speaking, it doesn't give permanent protection, like permanent papers, let's say, simply, to people who want to, let's say, who are in Turkey and they cannot leave Turkey. They don't have an option. And also another thing is that if you don't have your permanent papers, it's hard for you to travel, let's say. It's hard for you to travel to another country, or it's very hard for you to reunify, to have family members reunified with you in Turkey. So these are some of the practical legal issues that many of the interviewees, let's say Syrians, when I made this research throughout the years, were mentioning when they were in Turkey. Whereas where you are in Greece, for example, and you have your refugee card, you have the right to go, let's say, to Germany or to Sweden. Of course, you cannot reclaim asylum. And if you do, it's not legal. It's not legal. You can travel. You can even request Schengen visa and everything that you have the right for, and then come back to the country that they have given you the papers, the red card, originates from, let's say.
Perfect. I think you explained very well. I think also because it's one of the misperceived and misconceived, and sometimes I think the conceptually misunderstood debates ever, especially on migration, the refugee law, and the practice. And I think it's that's why I think your work is like an excellent contribution in that regard as well. I'm also very curious to, hear about the field work you conducted, because I think methodologically, I think it's one of the hardest points also of your work ever, I suppose. As a reader, I've been highly, impressed by the amount of work you've done. Because especially in the field work in Lesbos, I think during the emergency and post-emergency phases of that extensive field work, from a legal and practical standpoints, I think how did the Lesbos experience as a hotspot approach and the EU-Turkey deal in 2016, I suppose, transform Lesbos into what you describe as a containment zone, and what were the realities of the people, what they were telling you in some of the conducts of the interviews you've done.
Okay, thank you so much, Herman, for the question. Actually, for me, I think when you are working in this sector, for me, either you're a policymaker or an academician, it's you have to somehow find time and go to the field. I know that I'm not saying that because I did it, but I'm just saying that this experience was valuable in terms of scientific also data, but also for me, it shaped me. You know what I mean? It shaped me. And I think that's the problem with many people who work in the sector. There is lots of funding out there. But unfortunately, they don't invest. Also, field work, as you know very well, and when it has to do with human beings, when it has to do with refugee camps, it's hard. It's not easy, because you come across with the trauma of the people. You come across with people that probably they lost their family members in a shipwreck, probably, or even the journey as an experience itself is a traumatic experience. The fact that they left the country, so for Syrians, they left. There was the conflict. They had to leave. They left many belongings there. They don't have their legal papers with them. So when you are going to Lesbos, or back at the time when we went to Lesbos, when I was there with 2 colleagues, and I'm talking about my dear colleague Nicola from London. Back at the time, she was the producer and filmmaker. So it was not easy. It was not easy because back at the time, I remember we used to count the boats at the shore, and there were lots of people, lots of NGOs, lots of charities, lots of locals who rushed to the shore in order to save the people with whatever means they had, So it was an emergency situation. It was crisis. And also this, when you are exposed to that, and at the same time you have to be professional and do your work, and it's very challenging, and you need to approach the people in a very humane way, you know. So the good thing about this whole experience is that we managed to produce with my colleague a playlist of documentaries, storytelling ones, and this has been the product of like we have showed this to many audiences so far. And I think that was a good thing because people saw the reality. But coming back to the book and to frame it a little bit in more scientific context, I would say that the EU-Turkey deal from 2016 up to now, it is the main instrument for shaping what happens right now at the Eastern Aegean Islands and at the borders between Greece and Turkey, land borders and sea borders. So what I argue in the book is that this deal, which had not been agreed with the European Parliament back at the time, and so it was contested, let's say, back at the time, by many NGOs and activists. And even the EU Parliament said that it's not legal, you know, the way it was decided. So the problem now is that it led to what I call containment policy in the book. So simply talking, it means that we have many people in the camps. Many people who don't have access to a lawyer, unfortunately, Erman, they don't have legal aid as they should have. Legal aid from the state is not mandatory for both first and second level here, second degree. And also they have, you know, the most basic thing, they have their freedom of movement restricted. They cannot leave the islands, basically. And I'm talking about those that they are opposite Turkish side. Another thing which I think, and I mentioned that again in the book, is that the fact that you have people waiting for a decision for 2 and 3 years, it's highly problematic because somehow you criminalize the people. You criminalize them for crossing from Turkey, let's say, to Greece. This doesn't happen only between Turkey and Greece. And the problem is that coming to today, because there is no much visibility, right? Many things have changed since 2016. Erman was from 2016 up to last time I was there, maybe 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Things have changed, okay? So the change, if we want to be specific, is that this whole situation has been normalized, has been institutionalized. It has become officially a policy from the European Union also. And the problem right now is that we have this very intense violence at the borders. Lots of violence, lots of shipwrecks. We even had 2 recently in Chios, South Crete, like a few days ago. And all this is the effect, the impact of externalization of asylum and of not taking the responsibility as we should, and of treating people that they are asylum seekers and they have the right to request international protection as being criminals. And so the refugee camps, we can argue, I argue at least in the book, that they are treated as criminal, as prisoners, because you can say that they are closed prisons, okay? They're not hotspots or only reception centers or open centers that you can go in and out and move freely. So, and taking into consideration the big, all the narratives with the racism and extreme right and Islamophobia in Greece, it is highly problematic. And also there is, you know, the islands are far, they're not close to the capital. So there's not enough visibility. people who work, even people who work right now with refugees, Erman, like I have colleagues, lawyers from different organizations, they work and they are afraid. They are being terrorized of helping them, of like supporting them. Yeah, that's the situation right now. It has shifted a lot since the time that I was writing that book.
It was so fascinating to listen to it, not in terms of the humanitarian side, but also the very realities of the map, and also the people's stories and what they have been going through throughout this process. It has been many years, and also the geographic realities, what people are going through, what they were suffering the most. I think was really critical about the book, that you really deeply tell these stories in tandem with the legal dimension of it, which is really really great work about it, because I'm also very curious to hear your thoughts on the narratives of both sides, because early on we know that Turkey welcomed Syrians as guests, which had also religious connotations to that discourse as Muslim brothers and whatnot, while in Greece the historical memory of the prosvygas, the refugees, the migrants, give way to maybe securitization and criminalization at the same time of those people. What do you think about?
Most governments, like of both countries, they were very positive, and they had all this pro-humane humanitarian speech. As you very well said, it was both from Erdogan government, but also from the government that we had back at the time, Syriza and etc. So this has shifted gradually. This has shifted, and although we could see that we had lots of societies, I'm talking also about the societies at the islands in Lesbos, that they used to be themselves πρόσφυγες, refugees from Minor Asia back at the time. They were very resilient, they were very positive. I'm not saying that they are not, but I'm just saying that this whole climate has shifted in a more securitized, in a more criminalized, in a more fear. There's lots of fear, and it somehow seems that this has been normalized, that we need to make people fear of the other, of the xenos, okay, of the other, of something which is different than we are. And I think one similarity from it was one of the outcomes of the book again. It's that the same happened also, I think, in Turkey, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you could tell that all this pro-Syrian, discourse, of course, with the geopolitical changes and developments in the region, which shift and change all the time throughout this last 10 years, let's say, like 10, 15 years since the Syrian war happened, it made the discourse and the narratives change. And I think that talking about Greece again, because here, we had lots of humanitarian standing trials for supporting people. Of course, all these trials were, they are innocent, and all these trials were problematic. There was not substantiated legal arguments from the judges. So that's why they were innocent decisions at the end of the day. But these people were dragged in front of the courts for at least 5, 6, 7 years, And talking about Turkey also, because of all this very nationalistic discourse from, I think, most of the political parties in Turkey, also in combination with the economic crisis, with the devaluation of the currency in Turkey, with all the political tension and all the internal problems that also Turkey faces as a country, I think this ended up to this shift in the courses, and also in the discourses, and also what we mentioned also in the book launch in the panel, because it was a great panel, I have to admit. We had a journalist, he was a Greek one, he was speaking about the narratives, and he was saying that also the media plays a very crucial role in shifting all these narratives, in shaping the public opinions, and in targeting people who are first of all Muslims, but not only, I mean, okay. And so they became easy targets. And now in Greece we have a very extreme right wing government right now. It's not only a liberal government. Many people want to present it as a liberal right wing government. It's not only that. Many of the members of the existing government, they used to support the Golden Dawn and the Nazis back at the time. These are facts. I'm not saying that because I have a specific political ideology. These are facts, you know. And I think we need to know the facts and analyze and speak the truth. Speak the truth. The good thing is that here in Greece, at least, there are people, I'm sure it's the same in Turkey, that they are still working with refugees, like helping, supporting from different positions. But if you operate, let's say, in a hostile, in a fearful environment, you always question your job and you always question your role in the whole system, which is very, very problematic, you know.
For sure, I think you down on an excellent point because of it's all of a combination. I think all of us, all of the, it's geopolitics, the law dimension, the international relations, the state to state, the state society relations, how they are formed. Basically, it's one package, and it's a huge package to say the least. Christina shared with me the link of that great panel. It's in Greek, so for the Greek audience, so listening to the podcast also will be, really benefiting from that panel. It's, I think, almost a 2 hour of a panel, which is like with 4 or 5 speakers I heard. I saw the transcript, which with the help of AI, non-Greek speakers also can get the transcript and translate and, see what's going on in the panel, which I think which was fascinating to see. We can share it with the audience as well as a link to the description. Also coming to the principle of other principles of international law, maybe, Christian, we can maybe go into this principle of like non-refoulement principle and the alarming violations about it, especially considering the illegal pushbacks, especially around Evros land border on the Aegean Sea, the shipwrecks we have been witnessing over so many years. From an international law perspective, also there's the problematic issue that the current system, I think, to a certain extent, may be failing to hold state authorities or EU agencies like Frontex accountable for these violations. How is this, from an international law perspective, a problem? And maybe can we do anything to fix that as the international audience, maybe?
Okay, thank you so much, Herman. I think that talking about pushback, non-refoulement, it's the principle of international law that you cannot return someone to a country that he or she is going to face danger for their life, or they're going to go through inhumane, degrading treatment, etc. So very simply speaking, this is what it is. And so the states that they are abided by the convention, they have to fully comply with the principle. They cannot return anyone back with under whatever conditions. So the problem here is in Greece right now, there's a very big issue with the pushbacks. And another problematic thing, at least what I find problematic, is that very few people, let's say it so, are talking about that. So few people risk to discuss about this very sensitive, politically delicate topic, which I find it so disappointing. So it seems that even academicians, they don't want to even touch this word pushbacks. I'm not talking about pushbacks because, I'm not going to be politically correct or something like that. I'm going to break the status quo, whatever. Or for me, if we really want to say that we really, especially those who are into international law and also international relations, they know about law foreseeably, we need to talk about that. We have very, very violent incidents taking place, not only in international waters, but also in Greek waters. and also in Turkish waters. The problem is that very recently in Greece, we had this, again, shipwreck in Chios, that we had members of the Coast Guard deliberately hitting, let's say, the boat of refugees. And even if they try to cover up the crimes, because we are talking about state crimes, as they are state officials, there is a policy which is very well known by the government, but also very well known by the EU. Also, Brussels knows what happens at the borders. Also, Turkey knows what happens at its borders, okay? So this is the problem right now, Erman, with the pushbacks. We have many people pushed back, or even people, there have been incidents of people who are coming to the shore at night and somehow are found in forests, somehow at the islands, Greek islands, and then somehow they're getting lost or they are getting disappeared or no one knows where they are. And in these groups, we have also children. You can have single women or women with children. It's not only, it's different nationalities, okay? So one of the problems is this. Also, another development, a very recent development, is that after the big Pylos shipwreck, there was this Pylos shipwreck that happened at the southwest of Peloponnese. There were almost 600 people who got drowned, and their family members back at the countries, they want to know what happened, where the bodies of their family members are. So the good thing is that there have been some opening process for charges for the Coast Guard. So this is where we are. So when it comes to liability and responsibility of people working in agencies, the problem with the EU agencies is that sometimes they have a problematic status, let's say, because yes, they have to report to the Commission, but sometimes when you have so many agencies and so many people around, it's very difficult sometimes to track them. And even if you do that, what is the political cost for that? Or, for the whole EU, let's say, status quo. The good thing with Frontex, because you mentioned specifically Frontex, is that we had this shift to a new leadership. There was this big scandal with Fabrizio Leggeri, the predecessor of the current one. Frontex was also liable to pushbacks because Frontex came to Greece back at the time, of course, in request of Greece. They didn't come like alone. This is how they operate, the EU agencies. But the problem was that their actions were not legal. They committed violations, they committed pushbacks, or they were returning illegally people and not letting them come to the borders and ask for asylum, because that's the procedure based on the law. And Greece and Turkey are abided by the procedure. If we want to say what it should be. Also, the thing with Turkey, based on my research and on my scientific data, is that when you return them, although, after the pandemic, Erman, Turkey does not accept any returns. So Turkey is not accepting. Turkey is very firm. I'm not accepting anyone. What I did throughout these years. I have a very big population of Syrians in my country, in my territory. It is what it is. So the problem is that back at the time, before, let's say, 2020, there was a problem with tracking for those who were returned. And this is one of the, I think, main arguments of some lawyers, Turkish colleagues back at the time, that you couldn't monitor the process. There was no international organization to monitor the process. We didn't know where the returnee centers were in the country, probably somewhere in the east. And the problem is that you were losing the people, let's say, somehow, So the process was not fulfilling international norms, let's say, at the Turkish side. I explained the Greek side, And that's what I can say about the Turkish side throughout the period of this research.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think we need to, analyze from various aspects, both from international law and also what's happening in the field, and combining with the narratives and also with people's experiences. I think that's a great summary of your great research. Maybe coming to the end of our conversation, Christina, maybe we can say as a maybe wrap up. Also, would you maybe like summarize as such? Maybe we can say the 1959 convention is not like necessarily broken, but rather the states willingly choose more interpretate but restrictive interpretations of the same convention. And maybe how far we come from that EU-Turkey deal as a legal tool to hold both sides accountable, maybe. And maybe we can conclude by sharing some of the good practices of how to
Mhm.
fix this in addition to what you said in the previous question.
Okay, so I think what happens right now with the EU, because the EU, after the EU-Turkey deal, it has also signed some more agreements, some more bilateral agreements with other third countries, like with Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and it seems that the EU-Turkey deal, it is what it is. It doesn't change. It's like something that is slipping. It's kind of slipping, but we can see its effects at the islands, at the people, and the fact that we have, as we said, all this containment, all this violence. It is one of the direct impact of the deal. So the initial argument, it was to stop the arrivals. Okay, that was one of the, and many people doubt it. Did it really stop the arrivals back at the time or not? There are data that they say no, it didn't stop. People still coming, we're still coming. The problem is that even now we don't have all these high numbers because things has changed. There is this securitization as we described it. But people are still, and you see what happens in our region. It's very close to our region. People are still, they just want to change. They want a better life. You know what I mean? And you cannot, I think, you cannot say that no, you don't have the right to come for a better living because bombs are thrown in your own country. Nobody has, and states don't have the right to do it. You know what I mean? So all this security vs human rights discourses right now, Erman, they always used to kind of irritate me. But right now, with all these geopolitical developments happening and all this, as I described, increased border violence that we don't even hear about, they hide it, the media. It's very problematic to argue that the fences and strict border controls are really, really beneficial to Greek people, to Greeks. You know what I mean? So the EU-Turkey deal, what it achieved to happen is, as I said, to normalize the policy, and now we see the policy repeating itself into the new deals when it has to do with what they call illegal migration. Okay, I'm not talking about those one about the legal labor exchange that they want to do. This is another component of the external cooperation. So that's what I would say. And to the other question about the good practices, I don't know. I'm just trying to, people who work in this sector, Erman, and this is what we were kind of arguing in the presentation 2 weeks ago, is that they are very, very pessimistic about where we're going in the field. And they were from different spectrum. Okay, they were journalists, policy expert, and then we had a lawyer, a postdoc researcher. So I can tell that people are really pessimistic because we don't see that there is really a human rights based approach. Of course, for me, I don't want to be. I always try to be optimistic. I always try to see the bright side of things. And so to share some good practices, I would say that here in Greece, for example, after all these years, let's say 10 years after the Syrian movements, we have professionals in the country. We have people who, even if the system is problematic, it has lots of loopholes, you know. I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about the system examining the international protection applications. We see many professionals, many people who have invested into trainings, who have invested into knowledge, who have completed masters, PhDs, you know. We see activists and advocacy groups who have done great work in order to improve the law, because you should know that the law, the last 5 years after the pandemic in Greece, has changed, I think 4 times they changed the law. So if you modify the laws every 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years, that's very problematic for the people working also. Now, for the lawyers, there are lots of needs, but the problem is that, as I said, only at the appeal stage, the legal aid is mandatory. So then you have this problem not having all asylum seekers, refugees with protection. But I think I still want to believe, and I know that there are societies and there are people who are helping, they are organizing, self-organizing, there are solidarity groups organizing many things. Even now in Athens, there is inclusion in the society, there is visibility for different migrant and refugee groups. But again, we have a hostile environment to operate in, and we should not forget that. That doesn't define us, though. And as a final point, what I would say, Erman, is that if we want to talk about academia, academicians, and probably young students that they want to invest more in this, I would say that it's nice to go and do field work. Go to the field, I don't know, volunteer or find someone who has been there and try to share, sharing is caring, you know. And for academics, I don't know, for me, they have many academicians here in Greece, they have very, very, I don't know, I would say obsolete points of view regarding the issue of Greece-Turkey relations and refugees, you know. For me, when I was writing the book, and I think that was one of your questions, I thought that this book would be also a starting point for saying that it's beneficial for us to cooperate rather than hate each other, you know. It's beneficial even in informal channels, although back at the time when we had the crisis, there was cooperation at formal level. I'm talking about there was cooperation at formal level. Then this formal cooperation was broken, it stopped, and then now I'm not so sure where it is. You know what I mean? And another point that it just came to my mind about the convention is that the convention, we need to have something. We need to have a tool to operate with. We need the convention. But the convention, when it was written, when it was signed, was 1951. It was like, it was after, you know, World War II. So we're not there now. We're not there now. So for me, my argument is that it is obsolete. It is obsolete. I don't know. There are many things that we could think of at a policy grassroots level to change, to shift for the better. But we cannot operate only with what was. It doesn't represent the need of the era, you know. That's my whole point. We cannot take the text and change it tomorrow. All the articles, of course not. But I'm just saying that we can't make changes, you know. The world is changing, and so we need to, for the good.
Exactly. I mean, I couldn't agree more, because since we are shooting this podcast in such a dire times, I would say, of international conflict, regional conflict, and all the balance of power shifting, especially after, as you mentioned, Christina, the post World War II environment compared to the last like 80, 86 years of events. It's been fascinating to see both the dramatic events unfolding and also the changes in international cooperation, as you highlighted deeply. And I think it's very important that, especially on the case of migration, the refugee law, it's highly important that, states collaborate and more or less renew what's not working for them, also for the sake of humanity and for their international relations also. I think this book particularly contributes to that effort also. And I think it's really, I'm really happy to listen to the book from the author itself and also from how the book unfolded in what kind of a context and which of the points that we should look into as researchers working on international law, international human rights law, and the like. So, Christina, thank you so much for both coming to the podcast and spending the time.
Thank you so much, Herman. It was a pleasure. And I hope we can find a way to have probably English subtitles for the video. That would be amazing. Probably we can talk about that. I'm very happy
Definitely.
to
I would
discuss
I would
that.
love to I would love to have you again also because we don't have we have too much topics to talk about and as if the
Mm,
world unfolds like this I think we will have more topics to talk about in the future also in your field of expertise particularly. So
that's for sure.
thank you so much also for the listeners who are listening to this podcast specifically. We would like to have them a huge thanks for contributing to our efforts to enhance and engage with further experts in the field. And thank you so much, Christina, once again.
Thank you.